There is no sound more disastrous than designer heels clicking across a sterile aerospace lab. When the vice president's daughter announced my demotion to her assistant, I did not rage. I simply smiled, left the building's highest security badge on the table, and walked out with the intellectual property for a $200 million defense project. They thought they ousted an employee, but they actually pulled the pin on a grenade that would obliterate their entire legacy. Hello to our amazing listeners at Boss Revenge Stories. Unfortunately, YouTube has recently demonetized our channel, leaving us without the budget to keep operating. If you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our hardworking team to survive and continue creating these revenge stories for you. You can support us by scanning the donation QR code on the screen or by clicking the link in the description or the pinned comment of this video. Thank you so much for your generosity. My name is Harper Thomas. I am 34 years old, and until a very specific Monday morning, I was the chief engineer of aerospace materials at Sentinel Aerospace Technologies in Austin, Texas. To understand the sheer absurdity of what transpired, you have to understand the corporate ecosystem of Sentinel. We were not building commercial drone parts. We were deep in the high-stakes world of military contracting. I had spent the last 8 years of my life developing, testing, and perfecting a synthetic titanium polymer alloy. It was a groundbreaking, self-healing material that could literally repair its own microfractures under extreme atmospheric friction. More importantly, I was the sole individual who held the core patent for this material. Sentinel possessed the manufacturing infrastructure, but I legally owned the intellectual blueprint. Our entire facility relied on a brand new $200 million defense grant from the federal government, and that massive grant was entirely contingent on the exclusive use of my proprietary alloy. However, corporate America has a funny way of ignoring fundamental competence when bloodlines and egos are involved. At Sentinel, the executives on the top floor rarely understood the advanced physics of what we built in the reinforced basement labs. No one personified this dangerous disconnect better than Marcus Sterling, our executive vice president. Marcus was a man who built his entire career on aggressive handshakes, golf course networking, and stealing credit from brilliant subordinates. It was our standard 9 o'clock Monday morning departmental briefing. The engineering team was deep into a highly technical review of heat stress variables when the heavy glass doors of our secure lab swung open. In walked Marcus Sterling, sporting a tailored suit that cost more than most of my engineers made in a month. Trailing right behind him was his daughter, Chloe Sterling. Chloe was exactly 26 years old. Her only professional credential was a bachelor's degree in social media communications from an expensive private college. She was wearing designer heels that echoed obnoxiously against the sterile floors of a restricted research laboratory. She carried a bedazzled tablet and a look of supreme, unearned arrogance. Marcus stood at the head of the conference table, interrupting a senior aerodynamicist without a second thought. "Team, I have an exciting announcement regarding the future direction of Sentinel," he boomed, flashing a predatory corporate smile. "As we scale up for the new government contract, we need fresh, dynamic leadership to modernize our approach, effective immediately. I am appointing Chloe Sterling as our new Director of Materials Strategy." The room went dead silent. The Director of Materials Strategy was my functional equivalent, essentially placing her directly over my entire division. Chloe stepped forward, giving a little wave to a room full of seasoned PhD holders who stared back in stunned disbelief. "Hi, everyone," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "I am so excited to be here. I have noticed that the vibe in this lab is extremely rigid and stressful. I plan to restructure the culture here to be much more artistic and free-flowing. Innovation requires a relaxed aesthetic." She then turned her gaze directly to me, her smile hardening into a smirk. "Harper, my dad told me you have been managing the floor. Since I'm taking over the strategic vision, we are going to transition you down to an administrative support role. You will be my personal technical assistant. I will need you to translate the complicated jargon into bite-sized summaries for my daily mood boards. Do not worry. We will find a cozy desk for you outside my new office. The sheer audacity of the demand hung in the air like a toxic gas. Marcus looked immensely smug. Chloe looked expectant. The dozen veteran engineers at the table held their breath, waiting for the inevitable explosion. They expected me to scream. They expected me to slam my fists on the mahogany table, cite my degrees, or threaten a massive lawsuit right then and there. I did none of those things. I did not waste a single breath arguing with a nepotism hire who thought aerospace engineering was an aesthetic choice. Instead, I smiled gently. I reached up and unclipped my security badge, the highest clearance credential in the entire facility. I placed the thick plastic card on the center of the table. The sharp click of the badge hitting the wood echoed loudly in the quiet room. I resign, effective immediately, I said, my voice perfectly level. I picked up my personal notebook, pushed my chair in, and walked toward the exit. Behind me, I could see the color completely drained from the faces of my veteran engineers. They were shuddering, a collective chill running down their spines. Unlike Marcus and Chloe, the engineers actually understood the federal contract terms. They knew exactly what I was doing. They knew I was calmly walking out the door with the only operational key to a $200 million empire. The drive back to my house took exactly 45 minutes, and during that entire duration, I did not shed a single tear. People often expect a professional who just lost her life's work to weep, or perhaps to hit the steering wheel in a blinding fit of rage, but my mind was completely devoid of grief. Instead, it was running a high-speed, cold-blooded diagnostic on federal contract law. As my tires hummed over the sun-baked Texas highway, I was mentally reciting the precise alphanumeric codes of my intellectual property release clauses, visualizing the legal chessboard I had set up years in advance. The employment agreement Sentinel had signed was ironclad, drafted by my own fiercely competent attorneys when I first brought my patents to the company. It clearly stipulated that Sentinel Aerospace Technologies held the manufacturing rights to my synthetic alloy strictly contingent upon my active, undiminished status as the chief engineer of the project. A forced demotion to an administrative assistant legally voided that employment contingency by stripping me of my title to make room for his daughter. Marcus Sterling had effectively and permanently terminated his company's right to use the very material their massive government grant depended on. Once I stepped inside my home, I bypassed the kitchen and walked straight into my private study. I booted up my encrypted local server. It took 3 separate biometric authentication protocols and a heavily encrypted passcode to unlock the digital vault. I navigated to my personal archives and downloaded the original 50-page licensing agreement, ensuring every digital signature and federal timestamp was intact. The documents irrefutably proved that any transfer of project authority required the express written consent of the patent holder. I had given no such consent. Without a second of hesitation, I opened a secure browser and navigated directly to the Department of Defense contractor portal based in Washington. This was not a standard customer service page. This was the federal registry that actively monitored every individual with clearance on classified defense initiatives. I logged in using my credentials and drafted a unilateral legal notice. It was a formal, legally binding withdrawal of my intellectual property license from Sentinel Aerospace Technologies, effective retroactively to the exact minute Chloe Sterling announced my demotion. I attached the supporting contracts, hit submit, and watched the status bar turn solid green. I was officially out of their system, taking the core technology with me. Back at the facility, a completely different, almost comical reality was unfolding. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was a secure text message from Julian, my lead structural analyst and one of my closest confidants at the company. "You will not believe what is happening right now," Julian wrote. Chloe just brought in 3 massive boxes of imported scented candles. She told the safety officer that the sterile smell of the laboratory is blocking her creative chakras. I sighed, shaking my head as the next message popped up on the screen. "It gets worse," Julian continued. "She is clearing out your old office. She literally took a stack of physical classified documents detailing the thermal threshold schematics and threw them into the open recycling bin in the hallway. She told us the blue binders were clashing with her new minimalist interior design vision. Throwing classified thermal schematics into an unsecured public bin was a direct violation of federal security protocols, an offense that usually carried immediate termination and severe potential jail time. But Chloe was entirely oblivious to the gravity of the room she was standing in, treating a highly restricted government lab like her own personal startup space. My phone buzzed a third time. Harper. She just called the IT department. She threw a massive tantrum because she could not access the main project server. She ordered them to completely delete your administrative access codes and replace them with her own name. The cowards actually did it. She is now listed as the sole project manager in the internal directory. I could not help but laugh. It was a short, sharp sound in the absolute quiet of my house. By forcing the technology department to erase my access and put her own name on the master file, Chloe had just unknowingly signed the death warrant for her father's career. The internal directory of Sentinel was not just a local company list. It was electronically mirrored directly to the Department of Defense oversight servers in Washington. I walked into my kitchen and began the methodical process of brewing a pour-over black coffee. The beans were a rich dark roast, and the bitter, complex aroma filled the room, grounding me perfectly in the present moment. I poured the steaming water slowly, watching the dark liquid drip into my favorite ceramic mug. I took a slow, deliberate sip. It tasted absolutely brilliant. I sat at my kitchen island, staring out the window at the bright afternoon sky. Completely unfazed, I knew exactly the sequence of events that was about to unfold. The federal security system was a cold, unfeeling algorithm designed to protect national interests at all costs. Very soon, that automated system would run its routine sweep. It would scan the Sentinel project directory and instantly detect that a $200 million defense initiative was suddenly under the exclusive control of an individual who did not possess a national security clearance. It would register Chloe Sterling not as a visionary new manager, but as a severe, unauthenticated security risk. I took another sip of my black coffee, feeling an overwhelming sense of calm. I did not need to fight Marcus or Chloe for my position. The United States government was about to do the fighting for me. It happened exactly at 2:30 in the afternoon. The United States federal government does not send polite warning emails when national security is at risk. Their automated systems act with the swift, ruthless precision of a guillotine. According to the frantic, breathless text messages, Julian began firing off to my phone. The entire Sentinel headquarters descended into absolute madness in the span of about 90 seconds. The Department of Defense monitoring algorithm completed its sweep of Sentinel's active personnel directory. The moment it registered that the sole administrator of a $200 million classified aerospace initiative lacked a national security clearance, the algorithm executed a hard override. Down in the main server room at Sentinel, every single server rack suddenly flashed a blinding, continuous red. At the exact same moment, the Federal Treasury portal officially froze the entire $200 million budget allocation. Sentinel was completely cut off. Up in the executive suite, Chloe was sitting at her newly decorated desk. Julian later told me she was in the middle of picking out pastel color palettes for her mood board when her dual monitors instantly locked. The screens turned a glaring, aggressive crimson red, displaying a massive federal seal and a stark warning about unauthorized access to restricted government assets. Any normal person working in defense contracting would have immediately recognized this as a catastrophic legal event and called the compliance officer, but Chloe was not a normal professional. Chloe was a 26-year-old social media graduate who treated federal security protocols like a forgotten network password. In a state of annoyed panic, Chloe assumed the internal network was just acting up. She decided to bypass the company network entirely to get the files she needed. She plugged a standard, unencrypted flash drive into her terminal, dragged 3 heavily restricted technical documents detailing the molecular stress limits of my alloy, and transferred them to her personal laptop. Then, committing the most unprecedented act of corporate stupidity in the history of the company, she opened her personal webmail account. She attached those highly sensitive, classified technical files and emailed them to a freelance graphic designer outside the organization, asking him if he could open the files and reformat them to look prettier for her presentation. The moment those classified files left the secure internal network and hit a public email server, the situation escalated from a simple project freeze to a full-blown national security breach. Chloe had just committed a federal crime by transmitting state secrets to an unauthorized third party. This action instantly triggered a massive cybersecurity alarm at the Pentagon. The federal network did not just lock her out. It initiated a total quarantine of Sentinel's entire digital infrastructure. Every single computer in the building went dark. The doors to the restricted labs magnetically locked. Marcus Sterling realized something was terribly wrong when his own executive dashboard crashed. He stormed down the glass hallway and burst into the information technology department. His face was purple with rage. According to Julian, Marcus was screaming at the top of his lungs, slamming his fists against the glass partitions, demanding that the lead systems engineer instantly restore his daughter's administrative privileges. He threatened to fire every single person in the room if Chloe was not back online in 5 minutes. The lead systems engineer, a pale man who was already sweating profusely through his shirt, looked Marcus dead in the eye and delivered the coldest dose of reality. "I cannot do anything. Marcus, this is not our system anymore. The Department of Defense has initiated a hard quarantine. The only way to unlock the core files and prove to the government that the project is secure is with a biometric override. The encryption requires Harper Thomas's physical fingerprint. No one else has the clearance. You fired the only person who can turn the lights back on." The blood drained from Marcus's face. The reality of his nepotism was finally crashing down on him. But the nightmare was only just beginning. As Marcus stood paralyzed in the server room, the chief financial officer burst through the doors, looking completely terrified. The finance department had just received the automated notification from the Federal Treasury. The CFO screamed over the blaring security alarms, delivering the final fatal blow to Marcus's ego. "The government just pulled the funding. They froze the entire $200 million grant," the CFO yelled. "We heavily leveraged our operational budget to scale up this facility based on that incoming government money. Without that disbursement clearing our accounts this week, we have no liquidity. I just ran the emergency projections. If we do not get that federal money unlocked immediately, our entire corporate payroll and all daily operations will run completely dry in exactly 3 weeks. The company will be entirely bankrupt before the end of the month." The sheer weight of that statement shattered whatever arrogance Marcus had left. His daughter had not just redecorated a lab. She had just accidentally triggered the financial execution of a massive corporation. The entire executive board was thrown into a state of absolute, unmitigated terror. The realization that they were 3 weeks away from total financial collapse turned them into desperate animals. Back in the quiet sanctuary of my living room, my phone began to light up like a slot machine. The caller identification flashed the names of the chief executive officer, the chief financial officer, and Marcus Sterling himself. They called 5 times, then 10 times, then 20 times in rapid succession. They were leaving frantic voicemails, begging me to pick up, promising me massive bonuses, executive titles, and anything I wanted if I would just come back and press my thumb against a scanner. I did not answer a single one of those desperate calls. I simply picked up my phone, navigated to my settings, and calmly activated a call forwarding protocol. I routed every single incoming call from any Sentinel phone number directly to the main reception desk of my representing law firm in downtown Austin. I instructed my ruthless corporate attorneys to let the Sentinel executives leave their pathetic, begging voicemails on a legally recorded line. I sat back, adjusted my comfortable sweater, and listened to the peaceful silence of my home. Knowing the people who tried to humiliate me were currently drowning in a disaster of their own making. It was barely 24 hours after the catastrophic meltdown at my former employer when my personal phone rang with an unrecognized Washington area code. The voice on the other end belonged to Arthur Vance, the executive director of the Washington Dynamics Institute. They were a towering titan in the aerospace sector, a massive rival that had been aggressively attempting to outmaneuver Sentinel for years. Vance did not waste time with corporate pleasantries over the phone. He informed me his private jet was already descending into Austin and requested a face-to-face meeting at a discreet, dimly lit coffee shop on the outskirts of the city. I arrived 15 minutes early. The cafe was empty save for a barista polishing espresso machines far in the back. Precisely on time, Vance walked through the heavy wooden doors. He was a man in his late 50s, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit, radiating the quiet, predatory confidence of someone who commanded billions in defense capital. He slid into the booth across from me, ordered a black tea, and immediately placed a thick, leather-bound portfolio on the table between us. The Pentagon gossip mill is incredibly efficient. Harper, Vance began, his voice a low, steady rumble that commanded instant respect. Word is that Sentinel's entire network just got federally quarantined because someone transmitted classified molecular data to an unsecured civilian server. Furthermore, my government liaisons tell me your biometric signature is no longer attached to the primary synthetic alloy initiative. I took a slow sip of my water, maintaining my composed demeanor. The executives at Sentinel decided my expertise was better suited for administrative support. I gracefully declined the opportunity to stay. Vance let out a dry, humorless chuckle. Marcus Sterling always was a magnificent fool, but his profound stupidity is my institute's ultimate gain. He pushed the portfolio across the table. Inside is a preliminary employment agreement. We are offering you a base salary exactly 3 times what Sentinel was paying you. You will have absolute, uncontested control over a brand new, independently constructed sterile laboratory in our northern facility. You report to no one but me, and you hire whoever you see fit. We want your mind, Harper, and we will pay an absolute premium to ensure you build your next generation of materials for us. It was an astronomical offer. It was the kind of money, power, and autonomy that aerospace engineers spend their entire careers desperately chasing. I looked at the numbers written in bold print, then calmly closed the leather folder and pushed it halfway back across the table. I appreciate the gesture, Director Vance, I said smoothly, never breaking eye contact. The salary is generous, and the facility sounds perfect. I accept the position. However, I have one non-negotiable condition before I sign my name on that paper. Vance leaned forward, his eyes narrowing with sharp intrigue. Name it. I am not just bringing my brain to your institute, I replied, my tone turning to absolute steel. I own the core intellectual property rights to the self-healing alloy. Sentinel just legally forfeited their manufacturing license when they stripped my title. That means the massive federal funding attached to it is currently floating in limbo. I want Washington Dynamics to file a formal, expedited petition with the Department of Defense to take over the entire $200 million national security project, and I want your legal team to submit that paperwork to the Pentagon by 4 o'clock this afternoon. Vance stared at me for a long, heavy moment. Then, a slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. He realized I was not just looking for a soft place to land. I was handing him the sharpest sword available to decapitate his biggest market competitor. Consider it done, Vance said, extending his hand. We shook on it. The transfer of power was absolute. I was no longer an unemployed engineer. I was the kingmaker. I left the coffee shop feeling a deep, resonating sense of victory. But the day's entertainment was far from over. As I pulled my car into my driveway, I noticed a sleek black corporate town car idling aggressively by my front curb. A man in a sharp gray suit was pacing back and forth across my lawn. It was Richard, the ruthless chief corporate counsel for Sentinel Aerospace. He was a man deeply feared in the industry, known for bullying whistleblowers into submission and burying former employees in endless financially ruinous litigation. The moment I stepped out of my vehicle, Richard charged toward me, waving a thick manila folder like a weapon. His face was flushed red with anger, and he skipped all forms of standard professional greeting. Harper, this little temper tantrum of yours ends right now, Richard barked, pointing a manicured finger aggressively at my face. Do you have any idea the amount of damage you have caused today? The federal government has locked us out of our own system. You are going to get in your car, drive back to the facility right now, and use your biometric clearance to unlock the master servers. If you refuse, I will personally file a massive civil lawsuit against you for breach of contract, corporate sabotage, and violation of your non-disclosure agreements. We will drain every single penny from your bank accounts before the end of the year. His threats were perfectly designed to induce absolute panic. In the past, watching Richard unleash his legal fury would have terrified me. But standing on my driveway, backed by a rival giant and holding the absolute truth in my hands, his loud barking sounded like the pathetic, desperate yapping of a cornered dog. "Hello, Richard," I said, my voice eerily calm against his frantic shouting. "It is a beautiful afternoon, is it not? Please, wait right here. I have something you desperately need to read." I did not wait for his response. I walked past him, unlocked my front door, and stepped inside. I retrieved a duplicate, highlighted copy of my original intellectual property contract from my secure desk, walked back out to the bright Texas sun, and casually handed him the single sheet of paper. "You might want to thoroughly review Section 4, Paragraph 2, I instructed softly. Richard snatched the paper from my hand, sneering with arrogance. "I drafted these contracts. Harper, I know exactly what they say. You cannot just walk away with our proprietary technology." "Read it, Richard," I insisted, crossing my arms over my chest. He adjusted his expensive glasses and aggressively scanned the highlighted text. The paragraph clearly stated, in legally binding federal terms, that the manufacturing license for the synthetic titanium polymer alloy remained valid strictly on the explicit condition that I maintained the active, undisputed role of chief engineer. Any forced alteration, demotion, or termination of that specific title by the executive board immediately and permanently voided the license, returning full and exclusive ownership of the technology back to the patent holder. I watched the exact, beautiful moment his heavily trained legal brain comprehended the catastrophic reality of those words. The angry red flush completely drained from Richard's face, replaced instantly by a sickening, chalky white. His hands began to tremble violently, making the single sheet of paper shake loudly in the quiet afternoon breeze. A thick bead of cold sweat formed on his forehead and slowly rolled down his temple. He read the paragraph a second time, then a third. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He was a seasoned attorney, and he knew instantly that there was no legal loophole, no forced arbitration, and no judge in the country who could save them. "Marcus Sterling demoted me," I said, breaking the heavy silence. The words hit him like physical blows to the stomach. In front of a dozen witnesses, he officially stripped me of the chief engineer title and gave my job to his utterly unqualified daughter. The moment he finished that sentence, Sentinel lost the legal right to manufacture the alloy, and without the rights to that alloy, the federal government cannot disburse the $200 million grant. "You," Richard choked out, his voice reduced to a frail, raspy whisper. "You planned this. You just let him do it." "I simply allowed your executives to execute their own strategic vision," I replied, offering a cold, polite smile. "Your leadership team decided that a 26-year-old social media graduate was more valuable to the company's future than the person holding the foundational patent. I just followed their brilliant corporate direction. Now, if you will excuse me, my new employer at the Washington Dynamics Institute is filing the paperwork to take over the defense contract as we speak. I highly suggest you drive back to your office and start drafting bankruptcy papers. Sentinel is legally dead. Richard and Marcus killed it." The chief counsel of a multi-million-dollar corporation stood paralyzed on my driveway, completely and utterly broken. He dropped the piece of paper onto the grass, turned around like a hollowed-out shell of a man, and slowly climbed back into his town car. He knew the absolute truth. A spoiled daughter's arrogance and a father's unchecked ego had just obliterated an entire aerospace empire. The consequences of arrogant incompetence do not arrive quietly. They arrive with flashing lights, heavy boots, and the uncompromising force of the federal government. At exactly 8 o'clock the following morning, A fleet of 6 matte black sport utility vehicles abruptly surrounded the main plaza of Sentinel Aerospace Technologies. Dozens of heavily armed federal agents wearing tactical vests emblazoned with the Department of Defense Cybercrimes Unit insignia swarmed the building. They bypassed the front desk entirely, locking down all external doors and establishing a hard perimeter. The investigative task force marched in perfect, synchronized formation straight up to the executive suites. They did not come to negotiate. They came with federal warrants to seize all digital assets connected to the catastrophic security breach. They stormed into the newly decorated office of the Director of Materials Strategy. Agents aggressively dismantled Chloe Sterling's workstation, forcefully confiscating her personal laptop, her bedazzled tablet, and her mobile phone. They even seized the expensive imported scented candles, tossing them carelessly into heavy plastic evidence bags alongside unsecured classified documents she had left sitting openly on her desk. The scene that unfolded in the main glass lobby of the company was a masterpiece of poetic justice. By 9 o'clock, the federal agents began escorting Chloe out of the building to be taken in for formal interrogation. She was no longer the smug, entitled executive who had sneered at my engineering degree. She was completely broken. Chloe suffered a spectacular, humiliating public breakdown right in the middle of the atrium. Her designer mascara was running down her cheeks in thick black streams as she sobbed hysterically. Scores of veteran engineers and administrative staff, who had already begun packing their personal belongings into cardboard boxes due to the frozen payroll, stopped to watch. They offered no sympathy, only cold, silent contempt, desperate and terrified of going to federal prison. Chloe turned her absolute panic toward the only person she could blame. She spotted her father standing paralyzed near the elevators and began screaming at the top of her lungs. "You told me this would be easy," Chloe shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly off the marble walls. "You said I just had to manage the aesthetic. You told me it was just a stupid government project. You completely ruined my life." Marcus Sterling did not say a single word to defend his crying daughter. He could not speak. He was entirely hollowed out, staring blankly at the federal agents who were processing his child like a common criminal. But Marcus had no time to mourn his daughter's arrest, because his own execution was waiting upstairs. The Sentinel Board of Directors convened an emergency, mandatory session at 10 o'clock. They summoned Marcus into the windowless mahogany boardroom. There were no friendly handshakes, no country club banter, and no respectful nods. The atmosphere was absolute poison. The board had spent the entire night reviewing the catastrophic legal damage, and they were ready to demand blood. The chairman of the board did not even offer Marcus a seat. He simply read from a prepared legal document. Marcus Sterling was terminated on the spot for gross negligence, severe breach of fiduciary duty, and corporate sabotage. But they did not stop at simply firing him. Utilizing the severe penalty clauses embedded in executive contracts, the board aggressively stripped Marcus of his entire golden parachute. They voided his millions of dollars in unvested stock options and legally seized his massive executive pension fund to partially offset the catastrophic financial damages he had inflicted on the company. In the span of a 15-minute meeting, Marcus went from being a multimillionaire power broker to a disgraced, financially ruined liability. By noon, the final nail was driven into the coffin. An official, widely broadcast press release was issued directly from the Pentagon in Washington. The federal government publicly confirmed the immediate and permanent transfer of the $200 million aerospace grant. The statement explicitly detailed that the defense project would be relocated to a newly constructed, state-of-the-art facility under the exclusive authority of Chief Engineer Harper Thomas. The government did not just take their money back, they publicly validated my singular importance to national security. With the federal grant officially gone and zero prospect of recovering their operational liquidity, the corporate dominoes fell rapidly. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the legal team for Sentinel Aerospace Technologies formally filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in federal court. The immediate restructuring plan required the instantaneous mass termination of the entire upper management tier. Every single vice president, executive director, and senior manager who had cowardly turned a blind eye to Marcus, and his blatant nepotism was handed a pink slip. The yes men who had enabled the corporate rot were suddenly standing in the unemployment line, holding cardboard boxes, wondering how their careers had vanished in a single day. While Sentinel crumbled into dust, I was sitting in a brightly lit television studio in downtown Austin. The morning financial news networks had picked up the story of the massive defense contract transfer, and they invited me for a brief, exclusive interview. I wore a sharply tailored charcoal blazer and maintained a perfectly composed demeanor. When the anchor asked me about the sudden collapse of my former employer, I did not take the bait. I did not gloat. I did not mention Marcus or Chloe by name. Nor did I mock the executives who had tried to force me into an administrative corner. I simply smiled politely and pivoted the conversation. I spoke eloquently and passionately about the brilliant future of the aerospace industry, the critical importance of honoring scientific integrity, and my excitement to continue serving the national defense interests with my new, dedicated team at the Washington Dynamics Institute. By refusing to insult them on national television, I delivered the most devastating blow of all. I proved that they were completely insignificant to my future. I had already moved on, leaving them to burn in the fire they had started themselves. Exactly 6 months passed since the catastrophic collapse of my former employer. I stood on the observation deck of the primary testing facility at the Washington Dynamics Institute. It was a marvel of modern engineering. A vast, immaculate space constructed entirely to my exact technical specifications. Through the reinforced thermal glass, I watched my team making final microscopic adjustments to the propulsion chamber. There was no chaotic scrambling on the floor, no whispered anxieties about executive temper tantrums, and absolutely no scented candles. When I walked down to the main floor, the technicians and junior scientists parted respectfully, their eyes reflecting genuine professional reverence. They did not respect me because of a hollow nameplate on a door. They respected me because I built the foundational science they were standing on. At the center of the main control console stood Julian, meticulously reviewing the atmospheric data feeds. When I negotiated my contract with Director Vance, securing my own independent laboratory was only the first step. I immediately reached out to the absolute best minds from our former company. Julian and the top tier of our old engineering squad were seamlessly transitioned into my new division. They were given salaries that accurately reflected their brilliance, comprehensive healthcare benefits, and most importantly, a completely transparent working environment where empirical science dictated the schedule, not the whims of an unqualified manager. My secured desktop terminal chimed softly with a priority notification. It was a forwarded automated dispatch from the Federal District Court. I opened the message and read the final sentencing memorandum for Chloe Sterling. She had narrowly avoided a lengthy stay in a federal penitentiary by pleading guilty to multiple felony counts of mishandling classified national defense materials. Instead, the judge handed her a severe, long-term suspended prison sentence with strict probationary oversight. More devastating to her massive ego, however, was the permanent federal injunction attached to her plea deal. Chloe was legally barred for life from holding employment in any industry, corporation, or civilian sector that interacted even tangentially with government contracts. Her professional life was entirely over before she even turned 27. Her father fared no better. The corporate blacklist in the aerospace sector is unforgiving and absolute. Marcus Sterling became an untouchable pariah overnight. No board of directors would ever risk their capital on a man who single-handedly bankrupted a massive defense contractor out of sheer nepotistic arrogance, drowning under the astronomical weight of Chloe's elite federal defense attorneys. Marcus was forced into a desperate fire sale of his multi-million-dollar estate in the Austin Hills. He liquidated everything he owned just to keep his daughter out of a physical jail cell. The man who once strutted through glass hallways demanding absolute submission was now living a quiet, heavily indebted existence, entirely erased from the industry he used to terrorize. But the final, most satisfying resolution arrived in a separate, heavily encrypted federal envelope later that afternoon. The Department of Defense had concluded their comprehensive review of the security breach. Recognizing that my strict adherence to legal protocol had ultimately prevented the core technology from falling into unsecured hands, the government awarded me a permanent, irrevocable elite security expert designation. It was a rare lifetime federal clearance level. I was no longer just a talented contractor. I was an officially recognized cornerstone of national security. No corporate executive, no matter how politically connected, could ever threaten my position or overwrite my authority again. I looked up from the terminal and nodded to Julian. "Initiate the ignition sequence, Julian," I said calmly. "The chamber is sealed. Harper, we are holding at 100% capacity. We are ready when you are," he replied, a proud smile breaking across his face. I placed my hand over the primary ignition control. I did not feel the need to boast or celebrate the destruction of those who wronged me. I just felt an overwhelming, quiet peace. I pressed the button. Beyond the glass, the test engine ignited with a blinding, magnificent roar of blue fire, perfectly contained by the self-healing alloy. As the brilliant light washed over the observation deck, it served as an undeniable testament to one simple, unyielding truth. Real power in America does not reside in an inherited title or a corner office. True, invincible power belongs exclusively to the irreplaceable mind. Thank you so much to all of our incredible listeners for joining me on this journey today. I would love to know, where in the world are you tuning in from? Please let me know in the comments below. If you found today's story satisfying and want to help our channel stay alive, please consider supporting us with a donation of just $1. You can easily do this by scanning the donation QR code currently on your screen, or by clicking the secure donation link provided in the video description and the pinned comment. Your $1 directly pays our hardworking team, helping them support their families and allowing us to keep bringing you the absolute best revenge stories on the internet. Thank you for your time, your support, and your justice-loving hearts.